Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on marine engine rebuilding.
My name is Chris Hamann. I own Lakeland Auto Marine, and we're going to do this marine engine rebuilding webinar. We split it up into two parts. I had so much that I know we couldn't get it all done, and we're done with the old stuff. So thanks for bearing with me on that. We're going to jump into stuff that you're probably really interested in. All right. And one of the things I want to talk about is probably most of us just want to work with the long block. Okay. This is probably how most of us prefer to get the engine in. You probably don't want to see it like the mate engine. This is, believe it or not, this is a twin screw job I just did over this winter. This is a pair of L29 7.4s. And I like them this way. I like doing everything. And I'll explain that as we go. All right. We do everything in-house here. We clean injectors. I rebuild the transmissions. I rebuild the raw water pumps, all that stuff. We run them here in the shop, everything. Okay. But not everybody is set up to do that, nor wants to do that. So when we get this incomplete job like this, you know, we're hoping and praying that whoever's doing this part's doing their job. Okay. But this right here, I call this the junk, right? This is all the stuff that engine builders generally don't want to see, right? You want that long block. You don't want the junk. Okay. But you know what? This junk is 70% of the time the cause of why my engine blew up, or why I might be getting accused of having an engine that doesn't last. Okay. Maybe they didn't clean the oil cooler out, right? They didn't, the thermostat is actually right here on this engine. It's in that heat exchanger, okay? Those fuel injectors, right? If this thing came in with a detonated piston or a broken ringland or something like that, right? Couldn't I have a lean cylinder, right? If those guys just put this stuff right back in, I'm in trouble, right? Could be in trouble, all right? The fuel pump, nobody checks fuel pressure. We need to do this. Look at that oil filter adapter. Right? Let's say this thing had a rod bearing or something knocked out. It got contamination, had water in the oil or something like that. If we don't clean that, how's that, that guy put my engine back, how's that going to work? I know some of our engine shops locally, they request that the oiling system come with them in the build, which is smart, okay? Because they want the cooler, they want the oil lines. I don't blame them on that, but not all of us do that, but there's just more than the oiling system. There's a lot of stuff here that could cause pain, right? And that, as a businessman, as an engine builder, we don't want, right? Because trust me, as a service manager or owner, wherever you want to call us, there's two things you never want to hear when the phone rings, right? Ever since, and you people. If a customer calls up and says, ever since you did this, blah, 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 you're in trouble. If he says, I had you people rebuild it, you people just did that, you're in trouble. You never want a conversation starting off with those two. I mean, never. What's this NASCAR pit crew in the marine industry have in common, right? That's my question. Everybody's in a hurry, right? And what I mean by that is, you see that junk right there? A lot of times these marinas, I call it NASCAR apart, NASCAR together, right? They got the butterfly impact, zip, 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 zip. They're ripping the exhaust manifold, fuel system. They're throwing it on a pallet just like this, right? They send you the long block. You do the bestest job in the whole wide world. We got the best honing process, the profilometer, the whole smash, right? We do everything by we primed it. We did this, we did that. They hang all this old junk back on here. It's not right. Guess how long you think my engine might last, right? NASCAR apart, NASCAR together. I see it routinely. These guys are in a hurry. I mean, look, I get it. The season's short. They want their engine. The marinas are just jamming this stuff back together. Drives me nuts. And this is why I prefer to have everything, right? I take all the exhaust manifolds apart. I do all that. I charge them for it, okay? And that's how I give them a warranty. We have a different warranty structure if we just do a partial engine, okay? I give them a 1-year warranty if I sea trawl the boat and everything's cool. So I got to trust the marine facility to do all this stuff, right? I'm not paying. If you're a marine repair facility, I'm not ripping on you, okay? But, it takes a team for success. I would say it's like, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, right? They won the Super Bowl. They won it because they had a plan and they had team. They had teamwork, okay? All these jobs, the sea trowel, the long block, the engine builder, and the guy putting the stuff on, it has to work as a team. If they don't work as a team, your chances of success aren't that good. Trust me, okay? I'll cover this. Inboard engines, right? This is a 6-liter LQ4 I just did recently, all right? Starter, it mounts on the bell housing, all right? A lot of inboard engines do this. They're not down here in the bottom, right? Kind of handy, all right? I love that. But got to pay attention to the flywheel. You notice how this happens to be a 454 Gen 4, but all these engines like that with a bell housing mounted starter on top, the ring gear is on the other side of the flywheel. You notice that? See how there's a ledge here? Not all flywheels are set up to put the ring gear on that side, okay? So you call up whoever you get your flywheels from, right? Or the guy, you supply a flywheel, right? Guy comes into your shop, says, hey, I want you to build me the baddest ass Gen 6 big block for my boat. Okay, no problem, right? It's inboard. You go ahead and do this. It's externally balanced, right? So you source the flywheel, all right? You get all this stuff together. You put a flywheel on with the ring gear here, all right? Nobody pays attention, puts the engine, and a lot of these guys don't start the engines up on the floor. They wait till it's back on the boat. All of a sudden, he goes to start the thing up, zing, zing. Remember that ever since call? Remember that you people call? You see where I'm going. Engine info stickers, all right? This is very important. Don't paint over these. Don't peel these off. Don't put them in the hot tank. Don't put them in the oven. Okay, please. There's a lot of pertinent information here that makes my life a lot easier. Okay. I got 3 different Mercury ones here. All right. But it tells us some stuff. First of all, it gives me the serial number, which I'm going to show you here in a minute how you're going to look up parts. But it tells me, hey, Chris, timing's 8 degrees, spark plug gap 45. And right here, to me, this is important. Almost all these stickers are going to tell me what the specified RPM of this engine should be, all right? And in this case, it's 4,000 to 4,400. This happens to be an L29 310 horse engine, okay? And that's what that thing should be propped at. You go over here to this engine, all right? That's 42 to 46, all right? That's a 340 horse engine, all right? Very important. Now this, I know it's cut off. This is a 5 liter. This is a 2000, I forgot what boat this was. But look at this, it's a 305. Look where they want this propped. I know it's cut off, I apologize. 4,600 to 5,000, okay? So that 305, you know, Vortec, they want that thing turning up, all right? And that's important. That's important because we don't let a boat out the door and I don't give it a warranty unless it runs in that range, all right? Preferably on the high end of that range. Because a lot of times on these sea trials, it's just the boat owner or the installing shop and myself. Okay, not a full load. They don't have cases of beer, food, and drinks for the weekend, the whole smash, right? You know, they load. You ever see these boats, right? They got 200 people on them running around. So you want this boat propped to the high end of the spec, all right? When I prop it to the low end of the spec, I can invite trouble, okay? I can invite trouble because when they load that thing down, even though they don't run wide open throttle, at least I hope they don't, when they're running that boat at 34, 3,500 RPM, they might be running almost close to wide open throttle, which is going to make my nice new engine not last, okay? Serial number locations, another spot. We've got these on these stickers here on these Merc Cruisers, but there's always Plan B. All right, and Plan B is on the bell housing pad. All right, you see we got this Volvo Penta 81GI-F. That means something. I got a sheet on this. 81G means GM engine. I means it's fuel injected. And F is the year, okay? A is 2001. All right, you can do the math and figure it from there, generally speaking. And then there's the production number. That is not the serial number. This is the serial number. This is Mercury, all right? Here's a trick, all right? You see this thing starts with M062-659. You always got to put an O, a zero in front of that. If you go to the parts catalog and type in M062-659, dunzo, you're not going to get anything. Because if you look back up here, you notice how all these serial numbers start with an O, right? OL 397-219, like in this case. But on this tag, I don't know why they did this. You'll never find that O. So a lot of times, as engine builders, we may not get the valve covers. We may not get the intake manifold with the sticker. We may not get this plastic flame arrestor cover. We don't know that, right? So try to save these tags. You know, I know it's easy to let them bake up and hammer them off with a chisel and throw them away, but you know, the newer these engines are with cam changes, which we're coming up against here, this is important stuff. Okay, so these serial numbers are important. So try to at least glue them back on or do something. This is a Crusader 6 liter. These are stickers. You know, it tells me right there, hey Chris, this thing was built in July of 03, and there's my serial number and there's my model number. Okay, I don't paint over those. Okay, you see I taped around that when I painted this. I'm not going to go through this because it's in your handout, but this is a sheet on how to break down a Volvo Penta serial number. You know, F is Ford, G is GM. you can figure it out from there. Like I said, I'm putting this in here. I don't need to go over it. This is the same document. All right, kind of talks about older engines. While they went to red paint in 01, they were charcoal from 94 to 00. You can read all that. Here's earlier model numbers. Okay, I'm going to skip through that. Parts catalog, I just want to touch on this. This is free, right? Anything that's free, I'm in love, okay? So I can go right now to mercurymarine.com, type that in, and I can look up my own parts, right? I don't know about you guys, I prefer to look up my own parts, right? I'm not picking on parts stores, I'm not picking on parts people, but it's hard over the phone, right? You're sitting there on the phone and say, hey, I need that O-ring for the oil adapter, it's right next to this bolt and this, or I need that check valve that goes in the oil galley. It's very hard for parts people to figure that out, right? If I can go to that parts catalog and point and click and get the part number and I can call with that number, I got a better chance of getting what I wanted, okay? Volvopenna, right? I can go to volvopenna.com/shop/0, and I can type in my serial number right here, and I can get what I want. 100% free. It gives me numbers, and then I can take that to my local dealer or whoever my parts supplier is, and I can give them those numbers. Crusader. I don't know these folks, not a commercial, but McCombMarineParts.com right here. They have just about every Crusader parts book, right? All the way back to 4.3s and so forth. Very handy when you're looking up Crusader stuff, right? You want to know how an oil diagram is, right? I put this in here, right? These oil adapter O-rings. You know, if the oiling system is coming into your shop, you should replace these, okay? I've seen these come in with RTV. That's a no-no in my world, all right? Here we go again, right? This is a 2002 and up Crusader small block. You know, here's the part numbers, right? Call your marine supply house. Buy them. Don't reuse them. Don't glue them. Don't do it, okay? Here's a Crusader Gen 5, Gen 6 setup, right? 2 O-rings here. There's the check valve. We'll talk about those coming up, right? Here's a Mercury. When you go on Mercury, right? Here's my oil adapter O-rings. Here's my remote oil lines, okay? Very important on an engine build, right? If that thing's contaminated oil, we're throwing that oil cooler away. We're throwing these oil lines away. No questions asked. It's going in the junk, okay? We ain't flushing it in the solvent tank, okay? We're not running brake clean through it and compressed air. We ain't doing that, okay? You buy a cooler. Simple as that. I hate that. You see guys that run that stuff through the solvent. It's like, why? What do you think your solvent tank's full, right? You got your solvent brush in there, washing on, just the guys are holding it up. Well, yeah, it's coming out good. What do you think? Let's roll it this way. It's crazy, right? You got all this money in a motor and you're going to argue over $100, $200 oil cooler? Come on. Same thing here, L2974, oil adapter stuff. Here's a classic case, right? Look at this ugly RTV on this Gen 4 big block I took apart, right? All nothing but glue. You know, horrible. Get the right stuff. If you don't know what to look for, send AERA an email, send myself an email. I'll help you find the right stuff, you know, but please take the time and do it right. All right, look at this. How'd you like to how'd you like to have that end up in your nice oiling system, right? I mean, that can, like I said, we could have the best job in the world, but if we do, it's the little things. It's always the little things that ruin the best work. It just is. There's a part number for a 3-liter balancer, okay? I put this in here. You can't look these up, you know, the 3-liter and or the 153 engine, the old 120 and 140 horsepower engines, same balancer. I see this rubber come out of here. You can't get this at a parts store, right? You can't call them up and say, hey, I got a, you know, it's not going to find it, right? You can still buy this at a Chevy dealer, okay? That's where we get ours. We get ours from our local Chevy dealer. So there's the part number. I'm just giving you this as a number, as a reference, okay? Service manuals, we talked about this, right? It's a little difficult to get information sometimes. I can go to clockmarine.com and I can actually get a subscription to aftermarket manuals. I just want to put that out there, right? Not all, you know, if you're not a Merc dealer, you can't get access to Mercury Marine manuals. You can't get any of that. Okay, it's kind of a pain, right? This is something I can buy a paper manual, I believe, or I don't subscribe to this, but it's a good source. Trust me. If I didn't think it could help you, I wouldn't list it. But you know, good spot to find some information. Talk a little bit about a scan tool. If you're going to run these engines, which we're going to talk about more in the next session, I highly recommend you purchase this. Okay, you're going to run them in the shop. It's $700 bucks. All right. trust me, most of us probably have way more money in our homes and our line boring equipment, everything else. $700, if $700 breaks the bank, we're in the wrong business. Okay, I'm sorry. You know, this isn't going to kill you. There's so much information, and you don't have to be a scholar to run this thing. It's very easy to run. There's YouTube videos on it. And here's all the different adapters. That's the kit I recommend. That's the kit I use. Okay, I use this routinely. Okay, and here's why I use it. A lot of these newer engines have runtime. I love this, right? So this is a 6-liter LQ4 I just overhauled. This guy's a troller. All right, and look at this. He had 3,000 hours of idle time. Now, if you add all this up, this adds up to 3,700 RPM, or 3,700 some hours. And actually, the hour is not on the screen. It actually is lower. But it tells me, here's what I like about this. It tells me how hard this guy's been pounding this boat, okay? So you can see here that it's only been 2.6 hours out of the 3,700 over 4,000 RPM. That tells me this guy doesn't beat the crap out of this thing, right? Also tells me the max RPM log. The max RPM that computer saw was 5,600 RPM. Who knows? Maybe revved it up in neutral or popped it out, you know, who knows? But usually it's a ridiculous number like that. But here's what I do. I snapshot this, right? There's a record button here. Again, this is not a scan tool class. I hit the record button here. I save this, right? And I mark down the customer's name. And I did right here. You can see my file name, right? This is this customer's boat. And I did this after I overhaul. We're running this engine in the shop, and I saved it, you know. And that way I can kind of go by from now. And if this guy's beating the crap out of this boat or whatever, I can say, man, you put a bunch more hours above 4,000 RPM here, dude. What are you doing? You know, running from a tornado or what's going on? You know, very handy. You can't erase this. Okay. So when I clear the codes and all that, so I just got done overhauling this engine not too long ago. Those numbers are still in there. Okay. That's why I take a mental note. Now I can send them to a guy. I'm going to give you a phone number of a guy. If you want to send it to this guy, I'm going to share. He'll blow all this out for you. There's a fee for it, you know, and you can start from zero. I don't recommend that. I just write it down, okay, or store it, you know, in the file, just for me, you know, just for me. I'm not saying you got to do this, and I say a lot of us are doing partial engines, but you know, if I'm the installing seller, I want to know this information. This is handy. You know, this is something that really could help me diagnose something, or it tells me how this boat was used, especially if I want to buy it, right? Let's say I'm looking at buying a boat. If I can get a report like this on a brokerage sale, this is money in the bank. Felpro Marine Catalog, all right? Felpro is a great company. We use them religiously, okay? Again, not a commercial, just what we use, all right? And you're probably asking me, well, Chris, what's the difference, right, in a marine gasket set? Well, they have a stainless steel fire ring, all right? We got specific seals, front and opposite and normal rotation, right? We have intake gaskets with restrictors, right? We use the restrictors 9 out of 10 times, right? We don't need all that extra heat. You know, if we got a carbureted engine with a choke, we always put the restrictors in. And it has the correct exhaust manifold gaskets, right? The thick header style gasket. But there's some cons, right? The cons are the latest catalog is 2010, okay? I work on a lot of newer stuff. This sucks, okay? Because I don't have, you know, for instance, if I'm working on a 2016 Volvo 380, that's not in this book, you know? I'll give you a cheat sheet on how to figure all that out later, but newer engines aren't in there. And for instance, a very popular engine that we do here, the 7.4 L29 is not mentioned. And the gasket, the intake gasket in the kit is not correct. And I'll show you how to get around that. Let's talk seals. Let's talk serrations. All right. I've got these serrations here. They mean something. Okay. I got to pay attention. And I use this picture on purpose because Felpro, from my viewpoint, has made a change here. For years and years and years, the opposite rotation seal was yellow, okay? I knew if it was yellow, I probably didn't have to pay attention to that serration. But now, here in the last couple of years, when I'm getting these kits in, everything's blue, all right? So now I really got to pay attention. I had to get new glasses, right? So I got to make sure that that serration is what I'm looking for, okay? And with this serration, with these lines, this crankshaft has got to be turned in this direction, right? It's got to walk the oil into the engine, all right? So this is what I'm saying. So this is now the opposite rotation seal. It's blue. You can see the serrations. I put little slashes in. You can see. I don't know how well it's going to come out on your end, but you can see the serrations are still going the same way on both of these seals. When I first got the kit in a couple of years ago or whatever, I thought it was a mistake, right? I've been building these engines my whole career. and I get this in, oh, it's not a yellow seal. Huh. You know, just the guy boxed it wrong or whatever. You know, there's no notice, there's no notifications on this stuff. You don't know, right? You do this stuff every day, all of a sudden you see a color change, you're thinking, and when you know that blue is normal rotation, you're thinking, I never even looked at it. I sent it back. I ordered another one. Guess what color it is? Blue. I'm like, ooh, maybe I better take a look, Chris, instead of being such a hot rod here. Let's take it, open it up. I looked, it was right. I was wrong. Okay, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Okay, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. So a lot of you guys been doing marine for a while. You see yellow, you know, not so fast. Okay, just pay attention. Okay, front seal. This is a bidirectional seal. Right, it's bidirectional, goes either direction. Not a problem. Okay, I can use this either direction. On big blocks, the seals are bidirectional. On small blocks, they're not. Okay, you'll see in the Fel-Pro catalog, they have a part number for a front seal that's different than the automotive rotation. But the big block seal that Fel-Pro supplies is this. You know, this I can run either way with these little diamonds in there. This is Fel-Pro's new blue seals. Okay, they gave me this P2904 number on the left-hand one, and this P93569-2. Now I don't know what these numbers are. Okay, I'm sure somebody at Fel-Pro does know, but this is my cheat sheet. This is for you guys. Okay, I know that this 2904 is the normal rotation as long as it's packed right, and I know this one's the right-hand rotation for a two-piece seal. Okay, and this is how it comes. Right, 17740 is the opposite or right-hand rotation seal number. It's blue now, and that's just that bag shoved in that box. Okay. But we got to check the serrations. We ain't jamming this in the motor unless I verify what's going on. Okay. Here's the other side. This is the normal rotation. It does say 2904. I don't know how well it's coming out, but it does say 2904 here, just like the bag did. But look, the opposite rotation one doesn't say anything. I can't see it, you know. So they look identical. I just don't want you to get in trouble. That's why, like I say, when it was yellow, it was a little easier. Now blue, a little bit of pain, you know, potentially. You know, just take your time, pay attention, make sure the serrations are what you want. Okay, and here we go. Standard and reverse rotation. They're both blue. The serrations are this way. That's for the crankshaft going this direction. And the serrations are this way for the crankshaft going that direction. Walk the oil into the motor. That's what the serrations are there for. This is small block, right? This is how I identify old school rotation, right? If I'm tearing it apart, right? The opposite rotation right-hand engine had gears with a bolt-on gear, and the normal rotation had a traditional chain, okay? Not so true anymore, but because there's some changes where they did use timing chain, but I just want to give you that out there, right? Here's a big block, all right? Press-on gear with the retainer plate. This is a Gen 4. Okay, they used a press-on gear with a retainer plate. Small block did not use a retainer plate. The cam would pull right out. Okay, pressed on. These timing covers, I'm just putting this in here. I'm not going to read these numbers to you. Here's the GM part numbers. If you like GM stuff, you can order this right from your Chevrolet dealer. Okay, small block and 4.3 with the crank sensor hole, without the crank sensor hole. Newer engines use the crank sensor, older ones didn't, right? The Chevy trucks always use it, but the boats necessarily didn't. Okay. So those are GM part numbers. I want to spend just a minute on this, right? This is a custom right-hand rotation engine. I know you're going to say, hey, Chris, what are you talking about? It's got a timing chain. Yeah, I know. It does. You're right. But there's a few differences here. Crusader and Marine Power specifically took GM engines that they bought right from GM, and they made them right-hand rotation in 1996, right? Mostly for repower applications. Not too much used in factory OE boats, but there's lots of repowers. But this stuff's could end up in your shop, and you could get in trouble. It's a roller cam special, all right? But the one thing I want to focus on here is this trigger wheel, all right? It's a 4X trigger, which is a traditional GM 5750 trigger wheel. You see there's two keyways here? Look at this. Crusader actually they have a specific part number, and they cut an extra keyway in here, all right? Now, if you guys have done a lot of these engines before, you'll notice that the square cut keyway is what GM always had in the trucks and the normal rotation engines. But this Crusader engine has a rounded keyway right here. So guess what? We got a 50-50 shot at this, right? tear down guy rips the motor down, right? We're not paying attention. Zip, 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 NASCAR it apart, right? Zip, 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 zip. You guys have done a million small block Chevys your whole career. You put this together, the builder's looking at this going, what do you think? I got two key. What do you do, right? You go to the service manual? I'll tell you, trust me, it doesn't. All right. I can just tell you from experience, right? That I got to line the round one up on a right-hand rotation engine, and I got to line this up on a left-hand rotation engine. And if I screw this up, my ignition timing is going to be 30 degrees advanced. Okay. It's going to be 30 degrees advanced, and it's your fault, the builder. It's our fault. Okay. You don't time these engines with a timing light. Okay. We'll get into that later. With the HVS distributor. Okay. We don't. Right? It's all done electronically through the crank trigger. But what I want to touch on is this shaded area. All right. You see how I kind of line that up with this leading edge. We'll call this the leading edge. We'll call this the trailing edge if we're turning clockwise or normal rotation. All right. Now you're going to say, Chris, how do you know that's worth 30 degrees? Well, let's think about it, right? 720 degrees in a 4-stroke cycle, right? Crank spins twice, cam spins once, we get that, right? Engine 101. If I divide 720 by 8, I get 90. So that means every 90 degrees, I'm going to have an ignition event, all right? So this is 30, this is 60, okay? This flat area. So from here to here is 90 degrees. This is 30. I might be able to go back a little easier. This is 30. That little tooth is 30. This is 60. All right. But I want you to think about something, okay? Because if this engine is rotating clockwise this way, this is the leading edge. Agreed, right? And this is where the keyway would be lined up. If I put it here and this engine rotates right hand flywheel, all right, or opposite rotation, it's going this way. Isn't that the leading edge? Wouldn't that advance my ignition timing? And maybe could that detonate a piston or not run right? I have not seen this screwed up yet. I'm just waiting, right? Because I tore this engine apart and I saw this and I figured, and I looked at this like, ooh. Again, download this book. This could save you. Trust me. I don't want anybody to run on this problem. But this is trick. This thing's not marked. It doesn't tell me that, right? Like I said, teardown guy gets involved. I don't know what's going on necessarily. So I just want you to be aware of this stuff, right? This engine uses a timing chain in its opposite rotation, right? I know this is a scope pattern. I'm not expecting anybody to be a scope, but I just want to prove my point here. This red mark here is the #1 cylinder firing event, all right? And this is 4 teeth. This is 360 degrees. That's 0. That's 360. And then here's 720. So these shaded areas represent a cylinder. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right here at the transition. And look, you see that the leading edge, right? The leading edge here, the leading edge here, that's the next cylinder. That ignition coil is struck when that tooth runs across the crank sensor. But we also have timing advance. That actually happens to be TDC 0. But you know, we have a little bit of timing advance here, right? That's why the spark event is before the tooth, because the computer inputted the timing. In this case, at that moment in time, it was 6.7 degrees. All right, again, I'm not boring you with scope patterns, but I just want to show you on how this could screw things up. You know, this scope pattern would actually be the same, but the cam sensor reading here, the green, would be off. These are the special components on a 2002 and up Crusader engine, right-hand rotation. This is in, you can go look these parts up, but obviously the cam's different. The seal, the distributor is actually different because the thrust is different. This distributor is already obsolete. I've already seen these distributors fail. There's a roller bearing in here because the thrust is going down. And I already had to make stuff, right? I sold one of these engines brand new in 2005. The distributor failed in 2015, 10 years later, and I had to make something work, right? Because remember, these distributors are plastic in the GM vehicles. You know, we can't reverse the thrust on plastic. At least I don't think you want to. And there's a couple other different. Obviously, the computer software is different. The spark plug wires are different. I'm going to get into that. And water pump is turned around. This is, again, not a commercial. I've used Bullet cams for a long time. I had Bullet grind these up for us. You can actually call them with that number there, 500,000. That is a timing chain right-hand rotation, opposite rotation, timing chain roller cam. And it'll work with fuel injection. It'll work with the factory specs. So they had some cores. And I have them cut these because I know there's always people want to switch to a roller. Okay, we know about the flat. I'm not getting into flat cap at TAMs. That's another discussion, and the failures and so forth. But if you want a roller, this is a good option. You know, like I say, not a commercial, just who I use, and that's a part number for them. And this uses a timing chain, which leads us, and there's the specs for it. I'm not going to go over it. I also put some numbers here, Marine Power's number and Crusader's factory numbers. That's what I'm using them on, okay? But you need a different gear. You need the reverse rotation Chevy gear, all right? So you can use, if it's a Mallard distributor, carbureted engine, whatever, you need this gear. Normally the distributors are the same on GM engines, right? The distributors gear with the cam gear and the timing chain, the distributors are normally identical in GM small and big block engines, okay? But we got two shaft sizes, right? We got 491 and 500, of course. You know, most Delco distributors are 491, like the HEI. Most aftermarkets, I think, are 500, you know. So we got to source the correct gear if I want to use that cam in a conversion. I can run a chain, got to run this gear. Just want to give you an option, okay? Most of these newer fuel injected engines are using the Ramjet 350 cam, all right? 1409 7395 is the number, right? I'm building a Vortec 350. You can bet it probably has this cam in it. Not always, but, and here's the factory changeover numbers I listed here for you, right? If I'm looking this up by serial number and it comes up with this number, this is the cam that's in it, right? And I stole this out of the GM Performance Parts catalog for the specs. And here's one right here, an engine I tore down not too long ago. You see the last three digits there, 395. That's how I know it's the 1409 7395. You're going to see when we get to 81s and stuff how they actually shorten the part number. Okay. So just want to give you a heads up that most roller 305 350 cams is the same as a Ramjet 350. Okay. In my experience, this is just Chris's world. Your world might be different. For a short time, Crusader actually did marinize the Ramjet 350 engine. They called it a 5.7 plus. All right. I never saw this in opposite rotation, but I just want to put, you know, since we're on the subject of Ramjet 350, they actually put them in boats. I want to talk just a second about this manifold, right? It's called the IAFM, the Integrated Air Fuel Module, right? It's only used on industrial marine. It ain't the same as a car. It doesn't have that junk injector set up with the spider and the injector inside like the trucks did, like the VIN R 350s. It's not that way. This happens to be off a Merc Cruiser. It's using its own IAC. That's a discussion for another day. But this is a cast iron manifold, all right, specific to marine industrial. It's not the same as a Chevy truck. It might look like it originally, but the second half, the upper half on a truck was plastic and the bottom half was aluminum, but this is cast and the top's aluminum. This thing's heavy, okay? Some engines use a heat tube. Mercury, they have a heat tube coming from the exhaust manifold to this on some. Here's one ripped apart, a little bit different, see? So this is aluminum and that's the bottom. Okay, IAFM, made by Delphi. Most Volvo, Penta, Crusader, Marine Power, Mercury, they use this IAFM intake, okay? Here's a 6.2 base engine in a sport craft. I did some work on a year ago, okay? This is a GM based 6.2, all right? It's a 377 cubic inch. Mercury themselves took these apart and put stroker cranks in them, okay? They're based, they look like a Chevy 350. I bring this up because I'm going to show you here in a minute that Mercury has their own 6.2 that they designed. It's the same leader, but it ain't the same engine, okay? So this is earlier stuff. This is the world's worst distributor, okay? The Delco HVS, high voltage switch. I'm not going to go over it in great detail here, but there's a cam retard PID that we're going to touch on when we get into diagnostics in the next session, because sometimes as engine builders, we're putting these distributors in. And trust me, this distributor out of phase causes all sorts of drivability problems. And if we put this thing in wrong, we're donezo, okay? But I put this in here, all right? Another thing I want to touch on with this ugly distributor is the right-hand rotation engine. Remember I said they use a chain, they got that different gear. Well, if you know anything about these ugly caps, there's always numbers on the cap, right? We used to keep the odds on one side originally in the automobiles and normal rotation. We go over this right-hand rotation. Look at this. That's why the wire set is different part number. You would think, Chris, opposite rotation has a different wire set. Well, the reason is because number 4 is on the left bank of the engine on the distributor. We got to take this wire, we got to route it all the way around over to here. That's why the wire set's a different part number. Right? My point is when this thing gets tuned up, when you go to the parts store, whoever your favorite parts store, it doesn't matter. This cap is the same as a truck or car, or whatever you want to call it, is they always had the cylinder numbers here, right? 1735 and then 8246. Now I know it's numbered that here, but the cap you're buying from wherever you're getting it from is going to be numbered like this. I've already been to vessels or people that have tried to start engines up and they just plug those wires in to what the cap said and they wonder why it's popping and cracking and everything else. And what's the text say? Oh, I put it in the way the cap says. Oh, I took it apart. That no, you didn't. Okay, because this thing is a spider situation. All right. I know it's kind of a diagnostic thing, but you know, sometimes we're starting engines up, right? And I don't want anybody going down that rabbit hole and say, boss, I got it all right. Why is this thing popping and cracking? Pretty soon you're taking valve covers off, thinking you got valves tight or whatever, and here you got just the distributor wrong. Okay. And this is a KV pattern. When this thing is out of sync, you know, these things fire usually 8 to 12,000 volts. So that's 5, 10, 15, almost 20,000 volts. That's because the phase angle is wrong, right? Turning that HVS distributor does not adjust ignition timing. I repeat, moving this distributor does not change ignition timing. Ignition timing is done by the crank trigger. It's not done by this. But what I am messing with is the rotor air gap, okay? So if the rotor air gap is increased because it's not phased correctly, that drives the KV demand up, causes misfires, crossfires, all kinds of stuff. I was in a boat last year they messed with for 3 years, and this thing was out of phase, missing, popping at 4,200 RPM, big mess, okay? I don't want anybody in this room and in this class to have that problem. That's why I'm telling you this, okay? And here's where you go to get this. This is why I think you need to invest in that scan tool. On this specific engine, the spec is 43 to 47 degrees. This is an engine I believe I overhauled and fired it up. You can see it's off. And this is how I adjust that distributor. I rotate that until that number is 43 to 47. I lock it down. That's it. I'm adjusting the phase angle. Except Mercury Marine, they don't have cam retard. That's a discussion for another day. All right, we'll talk about that next time. I want to touch just on this. 5.0 to 5.7, okay? For years and years and years, carbureted engines, it didn't matter. I can tell you for a fact that the carburetors were 100% identical between 454s on quadrajets to 305s to 350s. I know you think I'm probably nuts. You're probably right anyway, but the jetting and everything's the same, all right? On a lot of, not all, you know, but a lot of them. And same thing here. You know, Volvo Penta, for instance, they had the same Holley 2-barrel carburetor for 5.0 and 5.7. But when it comes to EFI stuff, it doesn't work. Can't tell you how many jobs I've been to where the 305 is junk, right? And 305 Vortex are harder to find, okay? And what's everybody want? They want more power, kind of like what we talked about an hour and a half ago, okay? So what do? That 305 is junk. Let's put a 350, I'll build you a 350 Vortex engine, right? No problem. You slam dunk that Vortex engine in, now you got a surge at idle. I was at a boat last year, the engine was put in 3 years ago, okay? Guy says, Chris, I can't control the throttle, right? This guy goes to put it in gear when it warms up and the RPM is just chasing all over. I mean, his dock posts are broke. This boat's all scuffed up. It had all kinds of parts slam dunked on it, you know, but it was too lean at idle. And I looked at the serial number, and I said, sir, I said, this is a 305 calibration. I said, this isn't right. You know, I said, I sat there and I added propane to it and fuel, and the engine smoothed right out, you know, and fuel pressure and all the vitals were good. And it didn't do it till the engine was changed. Okay, it didn't do it before. Remember, it always goes back to what was done last. And I don't want an engine builder to get in this problem. I know this technically isn't an engine builder problem, but when you have your conversations with your customers, and a customer comes in, right? Because they go online, they go to Facebook groups, they go to their buddies, and they start asking questions, and all these people in these rooms start talking. That's a discussion for another day anyway. But they get in there and they want to go 350, right? And you can run into problems here, right? And I just want you as a builder to understand this. You just need to say, hey, listen, I'll build you a 350, but I ain't responsible because I ain't putting it together and making it run or whatever. But if you are making it run, then you are kind of responsible. So I just want you to understand this. The best guy to help you out with this is this gentleman right here, especially if it's a MIFI controller, okay? And Bob Rackey's his name. Here's his phone number. He's great. He never answers the phone, but he always calls you back. This guy's bailed me out of so many jams, it's not even funny. But he'll do a 5.0 to 5.7 to 6.2 calibration, right? I circled it right there. He's great. He's out in California. He's a super guy. Okay. He's a wealth of information. You got problems and you think it's calibration, give him a ring. It's $500. You send your computer out there, he sends it right back. You know, I've used him a zillion times. Good guy. Let's talk about some newer engines. This is Mercury's own 4.5 liter. This is a 2018 engine. It's eerily similar to a 4.3. Okay, eerily. It's the word of the day, right? But there's some differences. It's got their own heads. It's got this ugly looking intake manifold, right? Look at this thing. And if you notice the throttle body, even though it's not on, the throttle body is on the flywheel. You know, most time we work on engines, the throttle body's up front. Well, not this girl. She's in the back. All right. Cylinder head's different. See, it's almost kind of like an 8.1 where it's got the passageways in the front. You know, similar to a 4.3, a little bit different. This engine does not use a cam sensor. It uses waste spark, this particular version. Here's the V8 version of that, a 6.2. I showed you the GM base 6.2. Here's the Mercury 6.2, all right? This happens to be a 2024 model, but the throttle body is in the back, okay? And my challenge that I ask, I haven't overhauled one of these yet. They're really new in the market, you know, last 6-7 years, I believe, is the easy way to tell the design is the GM design, the throttle body is going to be up here or in the middle, but if the throttle body is in the rear of the engine, it's Mercury 6.2, okay? So I just want to make that point. You know, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it, but I just want you to be aware of what's out there, okay? Because this is the kind of stuff that's going to come into our shop, right? Mercury doesn't have an engine for this thing. It's going to come into our shop, and they're going to expect us to rebuild this thing, you know. I'm going to jump into big blocks. There's some real changes and differences here, right? We got different camshafts. We got different horsepower levels. I just want to go over what the differences are from what I know. And we're going to touch on Mercury's own 8.2 engine that came out in 2010. Really sweet engine. I'm a big fan of it. They run awesome. They have catalytic converters on them, but they're really good. First point I want to make is this aluminum oil pan, right? This is a Gen 4 big block, all right? You notice back here, it doesn't have any bolt holes, right? We got those bolt holes over the rear main cap. These early, I shouldn't say early, these 1980s, early 1990s Merc engines, and you can see it, we don't take advantage of all the pan rail bolts. We're not, okay? So, and I just put the Velcro gasket that I like to use, but there's rubber plugs, right? Now, I know this is a car pan. This is out of the Merc book. You see this rubber plug here? That's got to go in right here because there's no bolt hole here. Now, those rubber plugs are obsolete. So here's a teardown guy, right? Teardown guy, NASCAR apart, zip, 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 zip. Those things are stuck to the gasket from 200 years ago, or it's been rebuilt 77 times before or whatever. And all of a sudden, these holes are wide open, okay? So basically, all I'm telling you is put a little dab of RTV right here on Gen 4 with this pan, because this pan doesn't have bolt holes there. So just a tip, I've seen them leak, right? And guess what? That's horrible, right? First thing you think is rear seal, right? Guy gets a boat back, I got oil on the bill, right? And all of a sudden it's because we didn't plug two holes. You know, I just want to make that point. I like the 17985 Felpro gasket. It's cork, it's a good gasket, all right? Sierra makes this part number 18-0348. It's a paper, a real thin paper. I like that too. You know, sometimes guys don't like cork, kind of gives up. If you want a nice thin paper gasket, source that from your marine supplier. Okay, Gen 4 engines with the aluminum pan. Let's talk 385 horse. Okay, this happens to be Gen 4 385 horse or 415 horse 502. All right, what's the differences? Well, it's got a forged crank, just like an old LS6 454, right? The 396 7416 crank uses a 6188 rectangle heads and uses the big 7/16 rod bolts, dimple rods, okay? And Elgin, again, not a commercial, just who we use. The cam has the more aggressive duration. So when you're building, and the cam, it is a different cam on the 502 on the Gen 4 engines. It is not in the Gen 5 and 6. We'll get into that. I don't know why. I'm not an engineer. But these are the cam shaft part numbers. So if you're building a 385 horse or you tear the engine down, you know, and it has a dome piston. I'm going to get to that in a second. and it's got the big 7/16 rod bolts, forged crank. The 502 crank is nitrated, but this is what we're using. This is your recipe. All right, this is the piston, right? This happens to be the H426 CP sealed power. It's got the real small dome. All right, that's what the bigger horse engine. If it's the 340 horse carbureted engine, it's got flat tops in it. Okay, and it's got regular connecting rods, and it has a cast crank. All right, and it has a different cam. Right, the 22-218, I think milling number off the top of my head. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. But this is the recipe here. Okay. Obviously, the 82, the 502 is a different bore size, 4-inch 466. This is the L29, okay? This engine, believe it or not, is 100% identical to a Chevy truck, okay? Except the injectors. So if I want to build, let's say I'm a PER, I'm a production engine rebuilder, I can take a 1996 to 2000 VIN J engine and I could build it. Everything's the same. Cam, heads, the whole smash, okay? This is Crusader's version, right? Just blue paint. Doesn't have the black plastic cover like the Mercury does, okay? Blue paint, same engine, right? L29, 96 to 2000. Now you will see these in 01 boats. Sometimes a customer will say, hey, I got a 2001 Tiara and it's got this engine. That's true. A lot of times boat builders will title the boat, the hull's been laid, the engines are in it, but they don't get it out the door. But GM stopped making these in 2000 basically. But I call it 96 to 2000. But don't be alarmed if somebody comes in and says, oh, it's an 01 and it's got this engine. Yes, it could have, okay? Here's the cam, right? The last four numbers, 2296, right? Same cam as that 96 to 2000 Chevy truck. I think it's an MC 1316, I believe, in Melling. Don't quote me on that either, just off the top of my head. This right here, lower intake manifold, identical to a Chevy truck. But there's one caveat. Remember I said Velcro, they don't show the right gasket. Here's a mistake, right? This engine's been apart before. It's got the paper marine gasket, right? This should have the plastic Vortec gasket, the plastic gasket that sucks, it leaks antifreeze, that basically paid our bills and going to put my daughter through college, right? I'm glad they made that stuff, because without those leaks, what the hell, it wouldn't keep our shop busy, right? No crossover here, right? On a Vortec headed VIN J. But this gasket's got to be that thicker gasket. It's got to be the plastic gasket or the Felpro fix with the aluminum or the steel backing. So this is what I want to get into, because when you order that gasket set, you look up in the Felpro book, and I got a sheet coming up here, I believe. It's confusing when you order the gaskets, right? Vortec head, it's got this little teardrop in here, right? Those are the two head casting numbers I've seen, okay? When you build these engines, right? It's got a little bit smaller combustion chamber. You want to build one of these things. Again, you don't want to change stuff. I got to know what horsepower I'm dealing with, right? This long block comes in, I got to give it back what it had. Otherwise, I have drivability problems. If I put 385 horsepower bones on a 310 computer software, I'm going to have problems. Agreed? So this is key. This is why it's up to us, the engine builder, to identify what we got. We don't always know, okay? So, but the clues are inside the engine. I may not have the serial number, may not have the luxury, maybe it's been rebuilt 10 times before, I don't know. But these are clues on how I know when I'm built, okay? And here's a sheet out of the Felpro book. This is confusing. I'm not going to read this to you, but it says EFI, accept EFI. But to my knowledge, none of these gasket sets have that correct gasket. So what I do when I build an L29 engine is I specify the automotive gasket set. They all were closed cooled, so I'm not worried about the stainless steel firing. And honestly, when I order parts for these things, I just call up or look up 96 to 2000 VIN J. That's all I do, right? This is the only difference. This fuel injector, right? This 251 80 245, this is a 1040 injector. This flows 40 milliliters of fuel in 10 seconds, okay? The Chevy truck injectors did not flow that. They look identical, okay? But you get that engine out of that 99 Chevy truck and you think you're going to put it in your boat and you leave the truck injectors in there, it's going to be lean, trust me. So this is all the L29s I've seen, Volvo Penta, Crusader, Mercury, Marine Power, all have this injector that I have seen, okay? And this is the Mercury Marine part number. If you want to change that over, 802-632T is the OE number for that. Here's my suggested tips on these engines. I'm not reading them all to you, but you can get a sense, right? It's 100% identical. The injectors are different, right? The timing cover does not have the crankshaft sensor hole, okay? They didn't even use the 4X trigger wheel like the small blocks. So the aluminum timing cover has the crank sensor hole blocked off. I haven't seen this in opposite rotation. So just a Chris's quick list on this engine, okay? L29 heads compared to the typical Gen 4, you can see the little teardrop. Obviously, cast no exhaust crossover. I know that kind of was cut off there, but that's key. Okay. Same thing with the exhaust ports. Got that D slot, I call it. You know, compared to the normal. That's a Vortex cylinder head. VIN J only. I have never seen these heads on anything but that 310 horse engine VIN J. I've never seen these heads on a 385 engine or anything like that. I have seen these screwed up, and this is why I wanted to cover this. Okay. So a lot of us, you know, like I say, we were taking core engines, or maybe it was done somewhere else, or people swap stuff. You know, I don't want anybody to get running any trouble here. This is the higher horsepower stuff. It's got a Lingenfelter intake. That's who made this for Mercury. Okay, big aluminum thing. This happens to be a 340 horse version. Okay, and this is a Gen 5 engine, by the way. Okay, but you're going to say, Chris, how do you know that? Well, it doesn't say Magna. All right, it's a 7.4 liter. Again, as long as nobody's been in here. That's how I know this is 340. So this is a flat top piston 3/8 rod bolt, regular cam. Okay. When I see this mag, right, that's an 8.2 502, and this 454 mag, that's the big dog. That's the big guy. He's the 385 horse, 7/16 rod bolts, forged crank, nitrated crank, the bigger cam, the whole smash. Okay, rectangle port heads, that mag right there. Injectors are different. Not between mag and regular, but the injectors are different between this intake system and the other intake system. The only reason I did not give you injector part numbers on this is there's 3 manufacturers. You got Kian, which is Japanese, you got Delphi, and you got Weber. Okay, and I've seen all sorts of different injectors and different rail combinations in these, so it would be too much confusion for me to list that. So that's why I did not give you an injector part number on this, because I've seen too many different ones. This gasket set here is for this intake manifold, right? It does not come in any Felpro set that I have seen, but Felpro does show it. It's a 17852. If I got my Merc part supplier, that's the part number to get it from Mercury, okay? This is the Arizona Speed Marine, okay? Very, very popular intake manifold used on Gen 5 and some Gen 6 engines, okay? It's AZM. It actually says AZM. It's embossed by the distributor. You can't see it in this picture, but Volvo Penta and Marine Power use it. I did not see this in Mercury, okay? Just Volvo and Crusader. Volvo Crusader used it too. Volvo Crusader and Marine Power. It could be 340 horse, could be 385 if it's 7.4. It's also on 502s, all right? You know 502s already got the big rods and the dome pistons. You got all that, okay? Here's engines I've worked on that have this Arizona Speed Marine intake, right? OMC King Cobra, Volvo Penta 74 GI, right? Crusader 502, and a 502 Marine Power, right? They all bought that same intake, right? It's the same manufacturer, just with different labels. They got these O-rings in here. Doesn't come in anybody's gasket set. Felpro, I don't care. So, but here's the part numbers, right? Crusader, you can find these at your local marine supply house. These are the original numbers, Marine Power, OMC, Volvo. I don't see these in Felpro. And a tip here is I always glue these things in. These things will not stay in those holes. That round gasket, that's like a square peg in a round hole. They ain't kidding. So I always put a little bit of elephant snot or something in there to hold that in, because trust me, you don't do that, that thing pops out, you bolt that intake out, start up, you got a vacuum leak. I've been there, okay? So I just want to make that, you know, I just want to make that point. These gaskets aren't in the kits, okay? Something you got to add. This is Gen 6 stuff, Gen 5 and 6, same thing. I stole this right out of the GM Performance Parts book. The one-piece crank casting number is 1409-7044. It's nitrated in an 8.2 502, but that's a one-piece forged crank. There's dome pistons and the big rods for a Gen 5-6 stuff. Okay, just so you got an idea. There's very few Gen 4 502. I actually got one in the shop right now, Gen 4 502 with a two-piece seal. Here's camshaft numbers, right? Remember I said it had that 2296 and that 74L29? These are the specs. There's the milling number. There's the Mercury Marine number. That's the cam that goes in there. That's the same thing as a Chevy truck, okay? When I'm doing the Big Daddy, right, the Gen 6 roller, these are roller cams, okay? The 385 and the 415 502 is the same identical cam. When you take it out, it'll say 1622. Here's a milling grind number for that. Here's a Mercury and a Volvo Penta number for that cam, okay? And there's the specs for it, just basically more duration, okay? But that's the recipe for these engines, okay? That cam, those pistons, that's how you build, in my opinion, a 385. Yes, sir, Rob.
Chris, I think just we got a few questions sitting here, and I know a few people have mentioned if we can get a copy of the presentation. I'm thinking maybe we should save some of this now for the part 2 that we're going to have in May. And yeah, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Do you have a slide that showed your contact information?
Yes. Sorry, guys. It was the second slide.
And like I said, we're going to everybody that's on today, if you want, we're going to send you a link to a part 2 to this, where Chris is going to get into some of the diagnostics. He's going to talk about some of the installs, some of the C trials, and that kind of stuff. But if you have any questions in the meantime, you can always email us on the tech line, or you can get a hold of Chris here. And like I say, we're going to get you a link to a part 2, and we'll cover. There's just so much good information here that we got to cover, and we'll do that in May here for you. So Chris, here's a couple of questions.
I say, send me, there's stuff you like. If there's more something you want to see, let me know what that is. If you want me to cover something else. I mean, I sat here and I've been working on this for a few months, and I just wanted to kind of get some stuff together here, because I figured this would be a good topic. I didn't want to make it boring or anything, but I wanted to cover some things. I know I spent a little bit of time on some older stuff, but that's the stuff that kind of kicks our butt sometimes, so that's why I did that.
Yeah, no, there's so much good stuff there. So a couple questions for you. How does the align hone affect the center-to-center crank-to-cam distance, and can that affect the mesh of the right-hand rotation gear drive timing sets?
Absolutely, it can. Years ago, you used to be able to buy undersized gear sets, so you can't do that anymore. But yes, that definitely is a factor. Absolutely. I always make sure I got a little bit of lash when I'm doing them, especially a block that's been done before. A lot of these like Gen 4s, I mean, they've been done, a million times, it seems like. So yes, it can affect that. Absolutely.
Okay, and then one last question, and then we'll wind things up. The shops, some shops are just short blocking 283 flywheel forward engines, and they're using a 1/2 inch longer stroke. So they're using the 350 small block crank, and they're using a cast crank. The 283 had a forged crank with a much different harmonic. So what are your thoughts on running a cast crank in these applications?
It doesn't matter. In my opinion, these boats, they're not big, heavy boats. They're usually wood boats. They're not getting run a lot. They're usually show boats. Most of the stuff is not a daily driver. So I would not have a problem with the cab. But he's right. The 283 was a forged piece. That is absolutely the truth. But I'm not concerned, because when they went to the flywheel forward and the 350Q, those were cast cranks. Those weren't steel. But no, I wouldn't be worried. Most of these boats are light. These old, like I say, years ago when the 283s were popular, these are 23, 4 foot, 5 foot boats. Yeah, there were twins. You could get a 28 with twins, but it's not like you're pushing a big tier or a big Sea Ray. Something that's really heavy. So I would not be worried. I would build it like you normally would.
Super. Well, Chris, this has been, like I say, just a wealth of information. We really thank you. I know you put a lot of time into this, and there's just a lot to absorb. So we look forward to having Chris back in May, and we're going to get him to continue on, and we'll and any questions that you've got from now until then, think about them, and Chris, we look forward to seeing you in May, and thank you again. It's been a very, very great webinar.
Cool. Thanks for having us, and thank everybody for attending. I really appreciate it. Like I say, send me anything you want to see or something, especially we can add to the next one. You know, shoot me an email or whatever, what you like, didn't like, whatever, we'll make it better or whatever we need to do. So
you will see that our contact information is there. You can get a hold of anyone at the AERA team by calling 815-526-7600, or you can always email myself or Rob. Our email addresses are there. And if we can't answer your questions, we will pass it along to somebody who can. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking time out of your day. We know you're all very busy, and we appreciate it, and we hope you have a great afternoon.